Yo, Shortbox Nation, welcome back. Thanks for being here, and thanks for pressing play. All right, that's where it all starts. That's the first step. You press play, and I start talking. So, appreciate you guys for initiating this week's podcast. If you're new to the podcast, well, welcome to the show. My name is Botter, and this is the Shortbox Podcast, the comic book talk show that brings you the best conversations with the people that put their blood, sweat, and tears into making some of your favorite comics. This is episode 437. And today I'm joined by Eisner-nominated writer, artist, and graphic novelist, Tom Scioli. He's known for being the author of the quintessential Jack Kirby nonfiction graphic biography called Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics, as well as superhero original comic series like American Barbarian and the super sci-fi opera epic Godland with writer Joe Casey. I challenge you to say that 5 times fast and not get tongue-tied. Super sci-fi opera epic Godland. You also find his name in signature kinetic retro art style and minimalist storytelling in other comics like Transformers vs. G.I. Joe for IDW and Fantastic Four Grand Design for Marvel Comics. Tom Scioli is also no stranger to podcasting. He's the host of the Pop Culture Center Total Recall show on YouTube and a frequent contributor and guest on the Cartoonist Kayfabe podcast. Tom joins me today remotely to talk about his new comic coming out through IDW next month. It's called Godzilla Monsterpiece Theater. It's a massive 3-issue event that kicks off with issue 1 on October 23rd. Final order cutoff, by the way, is September 16th. That's a Monday. So get your orders in for issue 1 by then if you want to guarantee you get that issue. And you won't want to miss this series because Godzilla Monsterpiece Theater pits the king of monsters against his most unlikely antagonist, American literature. In Tom's words, it's F. Scott Fitzgerald meets Ichiro Honda. And if you still don't know what any of that means, well, I guess this episode is for you. So stay tuned, and we're going to hear from the man himself. So without further ado, Shortbox Nation, let's give it up and welcome Tom Scioli to the show. Hey, Tom, how are you doing, sir?
Feeling good, Botter, especially after that generous intro. It's amazing.
I try to do my best, man. I always ask myself, what would Batman on Batman do? Because they used to do the best intros in the world. When I was like first listening to Batman on Batman like years ago, man, his intros would like make me blush. And I'm like, I'm not Paul Dini, but that was amazing. Tom, how are you feeling, man? We're recording this on a Sunday. How was your weekend? Did you do anything notable, anything memorable? Have you just been on press runs all week, I guess?
Yeah, it was really relaxing. I was at the zoo. I've been going for some walks. Went to some flea markets this weekend. So yeah, it's been good. And I've been getting up really early and going to Starbucks and like doing some work on trying to figure out the final issue of Godzilla Monsterpiece Theater. Like the first issue hasn't come out yet, but like I gotta, I'm like a few months ahead. So that's kind of the hard work is like landing the plane. So yeah, that's the headspace I'm in right now.
I've always been curious, like, what are the last minute things that a comic creator finds himself doing like a month out from the release? Like, we're recording this the September 8th. So we've got a little more than a month before issue 1 hits. It's a 3-issue mini series or limited series. Like, if I may ask, like, how much of the 3 issues are done at this point? Like, what else is there still to do? Like, what are the last minute tasks?
Yeah, it's interesting to talk to you at this particular moment. It's the first 2 issues are completely finished, barring any kind of like last minute edits or changes that might need to happen. They're done. The artwork's done. The writing's done. And so at this moment, I have the script in for the final issue and I'm working on the layouts. And in the layouts, I kind of give myself a little bit of room to like, maybe, it's like another edit of the script. So, just trying to make sure all these moments that I want to have happen get their time to breathe. And then again, 40 pages, each issue is 40 pages, and that's like a generous amount of space, but still like the ending, you want to give everything its moment. And of course, people want to see, a fair-sized helping of like Godzilla action too. So just getting all those things to balance out. It's a lot of fun.
How long would you say you've been working on? Well, I guess let's take a step all the way back to the inception of this idea. Where did this idea for? Well, you know what? I want to ask the idea, but maybe I should first read the solicitation. Let me read the solicitation, and I want you to add anything that might be missing, because I think this is one of the most. I guess I can only speak for myself. This has been so far the most surprising comic book I've read all year that has instantly become like a top 3 book of the year for me. And I'm not saying that because I'm speaking to you, but when Greg sent this over, big shout out to Greg Katzman, by the way. Can I say Greg Katzman is one of the hardest working guys in behind the scenes in comics at that, right? Like he works for IDW, he helps me set up these interviews, and he's just a great guy. So he sent me a list of creators that, hey, B, I've got, some creators that, if you want to get them on the interview, you let me know. I saw your name. I'm like, whoa, Tom Scioli's working on something? Okay, what's this? Godzilla Monsterpiece Theater? I love Godzilla. Let's see what it's all about. I didn't even look up. I did nothing else but that other than taking Greg's word. I'm like, all right, send the PDF over. I'll set up the schedule. So I didn't know what I was getting into. And by midway through, I'm like, this is the craziest concept I have probably ever seen in a comic book, and it is so fresh, dude. I also did not know it was a 48-page issue, off of the rip. So what I thought was going to take me 30 minutes, I ended up spending like an hour at night, like poring over. I went back to a couple of pages, so a little ahead of myself, but really great first issue. So I want to read the solicitation to set the stage for everyone that maybe is in the same boat as me. They don't really know what's going on, and they want to know, what is it you got cooking up? So the solicitation for Godzilla Monsterpiece Theater reads, Godzilla takes on his greatest foe yet, the Great Gatsby. The year is 1922. Mysterious man of luxury Jay Gatsby throws lavish parties from his palatial, wow, a $10 word on a Sunday, palatial Long Island estate, all in hopes of attracting the attention of his loved Daisy Buchanan. But his affair is interrupted as his party attracts the one thing more dangerous than love, Godzilla. Now, Gatsby has no choice but to turn his undying will away from his love of Daisy and on to revenge against the monster who destroyed his home. Come along with Gatsby on the journey of a lifetime and 3 oversized issues as he combines forces with the greatest men of the 21st century to stop its greatest monster. Written and drawn by cult favorite comic creator Tom Scioli. Amazing solicitation. Like if I would have read that, I would have been extra on board, but I actually enjoyed getting that surprise. So I apologize to anyone that was waiting for that surprise factor, but talk about a solicitation. Tom, where did where?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a long time coming, just like me doing some kind of Godzilla thing for IDW. We've been talking about it for a few years at this point, of some kind of Godzilla project, and just kind of, it was an ongoing conversation. What should we do? There's a couple different ideas floating around and stuff. But then the conversation kind of went towards just like all those things that were coming into the public domain in 2024. Like, we're going to have a lot of interesting public domain years coming up. And so like Steamboat Willie, Mickey Mouse's first incarnation is like a notable one. Sherlock Holmes, like the final Sherlock Holmes story enters the public domain. So he's like completely public domain, and a couple others. And so we're just kind of talking about like public domain. It was just kind of on everybody's mind and talking about public domain. And then it kind of reached a point of like, oh, do you have any, like, is there any kind of, Godzilla public, something from the public domain that Godzilla could interact with in some way? And so the wheels just started turning, and like the Gatsby connection was what sort of came to me first, was like, and Gatsby had entered the public domain, I think, a few years back, but it's the 1920s and the 2020s. It's, we get to be, Godzilla gets to come to New York. Godzilla gets to be, part of, sort of 20th century literature and stuff. So it kind of started from there and just sort of snowballed.
Man, I thought you just had a hankering to be nostalgic about your number 1 high school literature reading book. Like, as I'm reading this issue, I'm like, is that the Great Gatsby from the Great Gatsby book that, we all had to read in high school?
Yeah, it has, like, the nostalgia really did come back, and I'm like thinking of my high school teachers, and yeah, and it was like a book that, was kind of assigned in high school, and I wasn't that thrilled about it, and I
Same.
didn't quite get it. But then you'd come into class, and then the teacher would it would be
Hmm.
story time, and they'd kind of like explain to you what you just read and what the glasses mean, and things like that. But then, as the years pass, you get to encounter it on its own terms. And in preparation of doing this series, I got to read it like again. It's been a while since the last time I read, and I just really, really loved it. Like that's a lot of fun when you're sort of reading something as part of your job, and then you can kind of set aside the time, because usually it's like you don't have time. Oh, I can't waste time doing that. But oh, it's part of my job. I got to read The Great Gatsby, and it was just. I think maybe it's just like the age that I am or something, but like everything about it just like really clicked and came alive. This reading.
You're right. That is a book that has been on my one day I'm gonna get back around to it. And as I was reading this first issue, I thought to myself, back in middle school and high school, I'm down here in Jacksonville, Florida. So I don't know how common this was across other like schools and across other states, but we had this thing called the 25 book challenge, where you had to read 25 books in one school year, and you had like these little forms where you'd fill out the name of the book, the author, and then like a short description. And I used to try to not try, but I would weasel my way into completing that 25 book challenge by putting in like comic books. And there were some teachers that were like, okay, for every 5 comics equals 1 book. And to me, that was like, lady, is that it? Watch this. If I could go back in time right now and tell, my freshman year me that one day Great Gatsby is going to be fighting Godzilla in the same book, how I wish the 25 book challenge existed for 35-year-olds. But The Great Gatsby isn't the only literary figure that you have in this series that makes it an appearance, at least in issue 1. I'm sure there's probably other surprises in the later issues, but in issue 1 we get obviously Great Gatsby, we get Godzilla himself, we get Daisy Buchanan, but we also get Sherlock Holmes is in the story. H.G. Wells' Time Traveler is in the story as well. And I don't know if this is meant to be a surprise, so I won't ruin it, but we also have a mystery man that rhymes with Blackula that makes a somewhat cameo in this issue as well. Where did the idea to get the whole entire kind of like, American literature / high school reading curriculum involved in the series?
Yeah, they just sort of showed up. They just like it was in the writing process and the creative process. And I just, I'm unspooling this story, telling this story, and then I have this image in my head of Sherlock Holmes standing in a giant Godzilla footprint with his magnifying glass in hand.
It's just really funny.
Yeah, it just rolled from there. It just
Yeah, no, that's great. Oh my God, that actually knocked me off my flow here.
Yeah, I had the same
image.
reaction when I first thought of it. I was like, okay, yeah.
Okay. Was the pitch as easy as I thought it would be? Like, if I imagine myself as an editor at IDW, I get an email for Tom Scioli. I mean, it's like, all right, come on. Anything he's probably pitching right now is probably going to be a yes. But let's just, let me play hardball. Like, was the pitch pretty easy? Like, how did you go about pitching this to IDW, and how was that whole process? Were they pretty like, yeah, let's freaking do it?
Yeah, this particular idea they were really on board with. Which again, anytime you put something out there, you just don't know. And I had pitched other Godzilla ideas, prior to this over the years, and you just don't know. But yeah, they were very receptive. And then there's sort of a second layer of approval when you're doing something like Godzilla, where it's like a licensed book. And so they had to get Toho's approval, and Toho was completely on board with it too. So yeah, it sailed right through. And yeah, you just never know. I mean, just, the past 10 years or so, you kind of feel like a pitch machine. And it's like, you've just pitched so many different things. And sometimes it is a little surprising what gets rejected and what gets accepted. This one, any one of them I could really run with, but this one I was really excited when they gave the green light to it.
Well, how involved was Toho? Like, was it just at that initial onset to approve the idea? Like, did you have to send them any pages? I guess what were what was like that interaction with them like?
Yeah, they're sort of involved all along the way. I mean, the editor, Jake Williams, he's sort of the first, sort of the first layer. But at every stage, the pitch, the scripts, the layouts, they all, go to Toho, and then they have they get, sort of their say, if there's anything that I need to like be aware of or change or whatever. But it's been pretty smooth. And any kind of feedback has been minimal, at least in terms of like, having to like change anything.
Now, by my count, I believe this is the third comic series that you're putting out through IDW. I've got Transformers versus GI Joe via IDW between March 2014 to 2017. You had American Barbarian that ran in IDW as well, and this one would be the third one by my count. One, is that accurate? Second, what is it like working with, I guess, to go back to IDW, to be back at IDW? Like, what sets them apart from other publishers and companies that you work with?
Well, yeah, you're missing one. Also starts with a G, like Godzilla and like Gatsby, is GoBots. Was
Oh, you
another
are absolutely
IDW.
right. I miscounted. Yep. So number 4.
So this will be number 4. And yeah, I mean, I've just had a really good relationship with IDW going all the way back to Transformers versus GI Joe. Just really good track record. We've had a lot of successes together, and I've just really enjoyed working there. And they have, a lot of the licenses that I want to work with. And GoBots was one that I pitched to them. They weren't looking for anybody to do a GoBots comic, but I was burning to, to tell a story about the GoBots in comic book form. And so I brought that to them, and same as Godzilla. It's like I had this like passion to, do some kind of visual story with Godzilla.
There's something interesting that you said in, I think it was an interview for The Wrap. I think they had like exclusive opportunities to like break the story of you doing this comic. But in that interview, you said something to the effect that to prepare for making this comic, you made an entire Godzilla graphic novel just for practice. You madman, you. You talented madman, you. Like, to prove like how pumped you were for that. And I'm curious, like, what was that graphic novel? Like, was it like the Bible for this book? Was it a completely separate story? Will we ever see anything from that?
Yeah, it's a completely separate story. There might be a couple like sort of action moments or scenes or layouts or something that I kind of borrowed from there for this. But yeah, it's a completely separate story, and it was, I think it's hundreds of pages, and it is I put it on my Patreon. I did videos about it where I like walked through, showed you all the pages of it, and walked you through it and things. And it was just it was during the pandemic. It was like one of those pandemic projects, and I didn't have a job at that point, like a lot of people, but I didn't want to just not do anything. So I had a number of little projects I was tinkering with, and one of them was Godzilla. And it was just, when I'd wake up in the morning, it's like, what do I feel like working on today? And a lot of days it was Godzilla. So I'd sort of tinker away with this, Godzilla. It was essentially a pitch, but I would draw it and color it. It wasn't, sort of like the artwork wasn't finished the way my, artwork is usually finished, for publication, but it's still a comic that you can read in full color. So that was that. It was a ton of fun. And yeah, it was amazing preparation. Like, I mean, the idea was just to not let my, skills or whatever go lie fallow, that I need to keep, even if I'm not actively doing a comic book, I need to, stay in practice. And so it did that. But then the end result was also this really cool comic book. And then when I eventually, got to do this Godzilla versus Gatsby Monsterpiece Theater, it was like, that was, yeah, perfect preparation. It's like, oh, well, I can definitely make a Godzilla comic because I already did that. I already did that once.
I'm a big fan of the Questlove Supreme podcast. It's a music podcast that they interview like musicians, but also actors, entertainers, and things like that. And the common thing that I hear or kind of understand about some of these like big iconic hits when it comes to like music and songs we all know and just like things that just live in the zeitgeist. 9 times out of 10, those come out of like just last minute, just just last minute thinking. Like, oh, we've got 5 minutes in the studio left. Let's just jam and see what comes out of it. And it ends up being like the biggest song in the world. And there's a bunch of examples that they've like showcased throughout their years of like interviewing guests. And so I'm hearing this, and it gets me thinking about all the different interviews that I've been a part of where some of the best ideas come out of just like wanting to keep your skills sharp, or you know it's not for a publisher. This is me on my free time, like exercising my mind and finding that creativity. So it's cool to hear that you were kind of in a similar situation. And for all the crap that we had to go through during COVID and things, I think the most consistent thing I've heard from creators like yourself is that it was like a time to reflect and to experiment and try new things, and like maybe go into that folder of project ideas that you've had on the back burner. I guess, have you ever done anything similar to creating like a one-off or a unique graphic novel for any of your other projects? Like, I guess, how much time do you normally put into like prep for your previous titles and projects?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually kind of standard operating procedure for me. Like it just not for that like extended period of time, maybe, but when I did Transformers versus G.I. Joe, it was the same thing. Like me and John Barber were just talking about maybe the possibility of doing a Transformers and G.I. Joe crossover. It wasn't anywhere near being sort of like approved as an actual project, but I immediately got to work on it just because I felt the inspiration. Like it was a story. Like I was like, that's something I would love to work on. Let me start working on it right away. And then if it doesn't end up being something, my backup plan was just to, create like a creator-owned thing, and it would have been Star Morphins versus the Icelandic army, and that would like just to take like. And so I've been doing that for a really long time, where it's like if like an idea really captures my my interest, to just go full bore with it. And even if it's something weird, even if it's GoBots, like GoBots was the same thing. Like I'd go for like a walk during the day, just sort of daydream. I kept daydreaming about the GoBots. So and so it's actually pretty standard for me. It maybe isn't the most efficient way of working, but I do like the idea of having. So when these things maybe do get approved, I've got like a cushion there. I've got like I've done some prep work on it. And the thing you were saying about stuff that like in music, just sort of like goofing around, and then it ends up being something amazing. The thing I always think of is the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, because that was not their main comic. Their main, Eastman and Laird's main comic was Fugitoid. They were working on Fugitoid and banging their heads against the wall trying to figure out, oh, what's going to happen to Fugitoid next? And then they just started goofing around with these doodles of Ninja Turtles, and then that became their big thing. So I'm always kind of on the lookout for something like that.
You brought up TMNT, and sidebar question I had in my back pocket, but I read through your Wikipedia, and it mentioned something about you winning a grant, a Xeric grant, and I was like, what is that? I've never heard it. Then I go down a rabbit hole. I end up learning that was established by Peter Laird, co-creator of TMNT, and that was like an award that he was publishing to what does it say here? Comic book creators. It was a self-publishing grant. And I guess I was just curious, like, when you think back to that time, like winning that award for your, what seems like your very first kind of like breakthrough into comic books and self-publishing with the Myth of 8 Post, like, I guess, like, what do you remember from that time? Especially, like, I would imagine someone like you winning an award that Peter Laird, sponsors and funds, had to be huge. Like, can you put yourself back in that time in those shoes and tell me like what that felt like?
Yeah, it's a really long time ago, but yeah, it was a really, really exciting time. And I was just at the beginning of making comics. And prior to that, I mean, my comics would be like in, print runs of maybe like 50 or less. I'd do these zines, sometimes with other people, sometimes by myself, these comics zines. And that was the thing that got me to like make an actual comic book, and actually have it distributed through Diamond in comic book stores. So yeah, that kicked it off, and it was a super exciting time. It was, just one of a few different things I was doing. It was just so early. I think I was either like still in college, or maybe I was like just out of college when that happened. But there was a lot of like grant writing in general going on there, and like, should I go to graduate school? Like, what should I do? And so that was one of them, and it totally set me on a path like that. I look at that as, yeah, the beginning of my comics career, and having it come from Peter Laird was a big deal too. It also helped me sort of explain it to my parents and relatives and stuff, that like, oh, they knew who the Ninja Turtles were. It's like, okay, yeah, this is one of those
Yeah.
guys. One of those guys is has this grant, and that's what I'm applying for.
Yeah. Take that, Mom. Saturday morning cartoon is funding my career right now. Take that. Well, would you say that was like your big breakthrough, or do you have another moment where you kind of felt, I guess, when did you feel like, okay, I made it? Like, I am a comic book creator. This is what I do. This is what I will be doing.
I mean, that was definitely a step. That was definitely like, there was definitely a before and after, but really the big thing I think of as a turning point came way later, and that was Transformers versus GI Joe, because that was when I went from being somebody who, had a day job and did comics on the side. Then a little bit before that, I quit my day job, but I didn't have a comic lined up. I just sort of quit my day job as a way of being like, okay, I want to be a
taking it
full
serious.
time. Exactly. It was it was a scary step to take, to anybody who's ever quit a day job or thought about quitting a day job. And I had to scramble looking for something. And then within a few months, I had Transformers versus G.I. Joe lined up. And then from that point onward, I've been a full-time working cartoonist. So that I think of that, But again, yeah, there were a lot of steps along the way. And I had, by that point, I had done a lot of comics. I had done like the full run of Godland, all those things. But it was always just sort of a side job. That was when it became a full-time.
And you've been absolutely crushing it. So thank God for that decision that you made all them years back. And there is a lot of, I think it's safe to assume there's a lot of aspiring comic creators like listening right now that might be in that same position too, where they work a day job, they do comics when they can at nighttime, et cetera, et cetera. With all these, all this time having lapsed, and you're having amassed all this experience and as a professional creator, do you have any, I guess, like feedback or advice for people that are in that situation? Like, if you could go back in time and give yourself advice about, like, what you'd be going through, or give yourself a piece of advice that would help you, that maybe you wish someone would have told you when you first started, like, what would that be?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because giving out advice, because it's like, I mean, that is like a really serious thing to consider. And having a day job, like having a job comes with all kinds of stuff, like, health insurance and stuff. And it's rough out there too. There was a point where I was telling people, quit your day job, go for it. Now it's a little like, I'm a little reticent to do that. But in my own particular case, I wish I had, sort of quit my day job sooner, and just really sort of believe in myself, and give myself that space to, to just go for it and do it. And I do err on that side, just because I just think about life and how quickly life goes by, and it's like you get your one chance, you get your one life, and like, why not go for it? It's like there's plenty of fallbacks you can do, and pretty much, I don't know, it's hard to imagine like living my whole life and not having gone for it, but it worked out for me, so I understand it's not, it is like sort of an against the odds kind of thing. But yeah, that's tough. I guess also, just kind of believe in yourself and your voice. This is like, as an artist starting out, you have so much more to offer than you think you do, because yes, there are other people who have more experience, more polished styles and approaches and skill sets, but like, you have a freshness, you have something just in the way you do everything, that is uniquely yours. And like, lean into that, believe in that, focus on developing that. And just because I've been a beginner artist, I've been like an established artist, and yeah, beginner artists, they look at and writers, they look at the old pros, and it's like, oh, I wish I could do this like that person, I wish I could do that like that. But then, the established people are kind of looking at, these sort of new people on the scene, like, oh, I wish I could do that, like I wish I could unlearn this bad habit that I've developed, or I wish I could, have the perspective that this person has, or have like, this in some cases it's like, just sort of your personal biography to have, like, oh, I wish I, lived the life this person had, and to be able to tell these kind of stories. So that's one way of looking at it.
Thank you for reflecting on that. I appreciate that. And I guess keeping on this train of thought, this is a little self-serving for myself because, Tom, I'll be honest, after reading this, I was like, okay, let me get ready for this interview and let me get like dig into this bibliography, which at this point you've amassed like a pretty consistent and strong like list of work. You've mentioned a couple of things so far: Transformers versus GI Joe. We've said Godland for Image. We've talked about GoBots. So I ended up going back to Fantastic Four Grand Design. Love that. I'm currently halfway through your Jack Kirby biography or nonfiction autobiography. It's not autobiography, but biography book. And that has been like stupendous. The way that you're able to consolidate, the king of comics, like his entire life in these pages and these panels, it's like, it's incredible. And it's also like, it's meta in the best way possible. And I can't really put that into words right now. But now I'm like, okay, where do I go to next? Like, I want to dive more into Tom's work. So I guess I'll leave it up to you with this question and ask, what would you say is the most important body of work to your career? And which one would you personally recommend for people to get familiar with your style and, get an idea of what you're all about?
Boy, that's a tough one. Because it's like, it's almost like saying which one's your favorite, which I guess it's not, it's not exactly the same. I mean, yeah, what I'm doing on Godzilla's Monsterpiece Theater, like, is sort of state of the art. It's like, the best that I have to offer. And then just prior to that was my Stan Lee book, which I think, as strange as that sounds, I feel like there's a lot in common with my Stan Lee biography and this Godzilla book. Like, just a lot of the storytelling, the approach to color, the approach to design, typography, things like that. Like I feel like that's sort of been my path, has been that like each thing kind of piggybacks off the previous one. So that I mean, yeah, that's and Transformers versus GI Joe. That's, that might be the one that I get remembered for. Like, that one was a long time ago. That was like, I think 10 years ago at this point, and people still talk about it, and it gets, pretty big reactions, pro and con, which I think is also kind of important. It's controversial and stuff. Man, that's tough. There's a comic I did. I only it's only, online, and then I self-published a few issues and stuff. But there's a comic called Satan Soldier, which is this like superhero comic. And, sometimes I think that that's like the purest expression, just because it's so like, from the gut. It's like very, and it's also a lot of fun too. It's dark, but it's also, silly. Yeah, that's one. That's a tough question.
Well, look, you got me sold. Anytime I hear the phrase "from the gut," I'm like, oh, I'm sold, all right? Because I'm a from the gut type of guy. So, thank you for the homework. The good kind of homework at that. I guess getting back to Godzilla, since you brought it up, what's your first conscious memory of Godzilla? Like, do you remember the first time you were exposed to Godzilla, or the moment that you became a fan?
Yeah, I mean, Godzilla, like, I feel like it's one of those things, like, it's like in the womb. you you just get this like sense of Godzilla, this like
Yeah.
tremor or something. But yeah, I don't know, because when I was really little, it was like we were coming out of this like, there was like the Dino De Laurentiis King Kong. So when I was a kid, you'd go to like the boardwalk at the Jersey Shore, and everything was like King Kong themed. And then like Godzilla would kind of be like lumped in with that. Um, So like Godzilla, like there'd be like the rubber, this real cheap like rubber King Kong, but then there'd also be like the cheap rubber Godzilla, like I guess like late 70s, early 80s. I also like I remember the cartoon. There was like a Hanna-Barbera cartoon, and Godzilla was friendly, and they press a button, and so that I mean I was just really little when that was on, so I remember that. And those movies were just part of TV. Like the movies would be on like the UHF channel on like a Saturday afternoon, and they'd just be there. So yeah, those are the ones. And then of course I remember like a kid who lived in the neighborhood having that giant plastic Godzilla on wheels, and just being fascinated with that, and like the little button in the back that makes the fire shoot out of his mouth and stuff. That guy
All of you,
also he also had the Boba Fett, like oversized Boba Fett, and I remember
yeah,
like looking in the back of his head through the little eye hole, and there's like a little
yeah.
lens in there.
Every single story that you just brought up is currently going for like $600 on eBay. It's like, good Lord, I just want a piece of my childhood, please.
Yeah, the
Uh,
Godzilla. Every time I think about getting the giant Godzilla, it goes up another $100. So
and the thing is, like, you're like, I can't afford that right now. But you also won't afford it 2 years from now because it just gets rarer and rarer. Thank God for Super 7. I do give them credit for like bringing that nostalgia at a very affordable price point. So,
I don't know if you
um,
can see it, but I have the little Super 7 Godzilla up on the
which
wall here.
no, I love it. And if you're listening to the audio, I am shooting video for this interview. And not only is Tom in a very stylish, what looks like a pink blazer, which not too many people can pull off, but my man Tom is pulling it off, and Godzilla makes a cameo in the video. So there you go. Check it out on YouTube. Your answer is way better than my first conscious exposure, because I started thinking about what was my first conscious exposure to Tom Scioli and what was my first conscious exposure to Godzilla. The answer to Tom Scioli is way better than my Godzilla one, because my first exposure was that terrible Puff Daddy 1998 song "Come With Me." He did a song for the Godzilla soundtrack for that Godzilla movie in '98. So that was my first conscious exposure. I think that movie has not aged well. I don't know how high it ranks among Godzilla aficionados. I'm told by my man Corey Torgerson, who is my Godzilla aficionado, not very highly. Thank God for Shin Godzilla and Minus One that have like really made me like just gotten back into the property and loving Godzilla for who he can be. Um, Now my answer for first exposure to Tom Scioli, I will never forget being in a comic shop here in Jacksonville that is no longer around, but it was my first comic shop I ever went to. It was called Suncoast Comics, and I used to go through the dollar bins all the time. And I'd buy my dad would buy Wizard magazines from there. And I believe it was either a Wizard magazine or one of those comic shop news papers, CSNs. And they had an ad for Godland. And I thought it was the coolest image ever. First of all, the O had a slash through it. So it's like, whoa, they're spelling God with a slash O. Like the look, this is like before I even knew like who Jack Kirby was, which I think speaks to like his stylings and how they're still so awesome to this day. But that was my first conscious exposure to your work. Well, I'd say probably unconscious because I just wasn't smart enough to like pair who's the writer, who's the artist. Let me go seek these out. So yeah, fast forward, and I've become very familiar with your work and things you've done with Fantastical Grand Design and Cartoonist Kayfabe, etc. One hell of a weird tangent. Let me get us back onto Godzilla. But speaking about Godzilla, and you brought up your process earlier on, I want to get back to your process because I actually reached out to the Patreon community, the Shortbox Patreon community, told them that I was having you on, and if anyone had any good questions, I would share it with you here. And I think we've got actually two questions from one person that are pretty applicable here. The questions come from, I think I can speak on his behalf. He is a huge fan of your work. His name is Tony Ayupi. He also lives here in Jacksonville, Florida. He's one of the co-founders of the Duval Comic and Zine Fest. So he's a self-published comic guy himself. Tom, if you ever get a chance, if you're in Jacksonville, Florida, during the summer, Duval Comic and Zine Fest, it is amazing. Jim Rugg was one of he was the speaker at the first one. Yeah.
I
But
saw your
Tony,
interview with him.
good
You
stuff.
interviewed him, right?
Yeah, yes, sir. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's been on twice so far. Thank you. So, all right. Tony wants to know question one. do you have a favorite Godzilla comic run or Godzilla cartoonist? We'll start with that, and then I'll pitch you a question too, which is about your art process. So, I guess like what type of research went into got making Godzilla Monsterpiece Theater? Like, yeah, I think you mentioned in a previous interview that this kind of gave you an opportunity to go back to a lot of the Godzilla comics. I know that he's had a pretty rich history in terms of like having his own Marvel series. He's been with IDW, obviously, and Dark Horse. Like, I guess what is your favorite Godzilla comic series outside of your own?
Yeah, I mean, there's just something about that Marvel one, the Trimpy Marvel, um, just like on newsprint with like this way off model Godzilla. Like it just sort of shows you the range that you can draw Godzilla and still have it recognizable as Godzilla, and just bright green. Like I love the green that Godzilla's in that. So it is a really fun comic. But I mean, there have been so many excellent Godzilla comics. There were I mean uh, from I think Art Adams and I'm trying to think. It was either Steve Bissette. I think Steve Bissette did like a couple Godzillas.
Art Adams did the cover for the Dark Horse run from like 95 or 96. He did a lot of those covers, and I think Kevin McGuire was the writer for them.
Yeah, I think there's like one Art Adams Godzilla comic like that he drew, or maybe I'm thinking of Michael Golden, but I'm pretty sure it was Art Adams. Like I have a whole pile of all this stuff, and then there's even one. I think it might be in the Steve Bissette Godzilla. There's a pinup by Alan Moore. Like Alan Moore drew this like insane Godzilla drawing, and if you've ever seen like Alan Moore's drawing style, it's kind of like a pointillese. It's like a little bit R. Crumb and then a little bit Drew Friedman. And it's just this like really crazy image with like a million things happening. And then even with like a million things happening, there's, each individual figure is kind of like doing a bunch of things, like has their arms in a bunch of different positions. And then, I mean, the IDW stuff's been really great too. And James Stokey's Godzilla, I think it's Godzilla 100-Year War or Godzilla Century War. Half Century War. That's it. Yeah, like that one was sort of a recent one that kind of really, got my attention where I was like, I mean, recent, I guess it's like, 12 years ago at this point, maybe, but where I was like, okay, yeah, there's some interesting stuff going on with Godzilla comics right now.
I'm so glad you said that because for the longest time, I always thought that was like a cliche thing to say because it's so good. It's like, it's James Stokey. Like, yeah, that's like an easy answer. But he also followed it up with, I believe, Godzilla in Hell and proved that it wasn't a fluke. It's like, no, I'm not just writing, yes, it's Godzilla. It's already an automatic cool factor. But what he did with the character and just like some of those panels, I mean, yeah, same here. Half Century War. I don't know. I think I've read that during a time where I was just like really focused on one publisher or just following characters, and that kind of just showed me like the power of the medium, of comic books and the ability to take these iconic and easily recognizable properties and just to have complete fun with them, to throw them into these stories. And I guess for me, that one, I have that in a very high regard because of the humanity of the story, you know? And I see a lot of that in your story in Monsterpiece Theater, where, yes, Godzilla, there's some awesome scenes of Godzilla just wrecking havoc in the comic book. But I'm really fascinated by like Gatsby and his motivation to destroy Godzilla and what it means. And it got me thinking about, all the other crossovers and places that Godzilla has been in comic books. I mean, I think currently right now he's got a series of, the Power Rangers. I think there was a series where he was fighting pirates or something to that effect. He was, he did a crossover with the Justice League. And I guess I was curious to hear from you, like, what do you think it is about Godzilla that allows him to kind of be able to live in these different worlds? Is there like a certain theme to him in your mind, or I guess even in your case, like, I guess why does it make sense? Even though it's like crazy to hear at first that it's Godzilla versus Gatsby and Sherlock Holmes. Like, what do you think it is about Godzilla that lets him like live in these worlds comfortably?
Yeah, I mean, any story is better with Godzilla in it. Like
Enough
that's
said.
just a law.
You should just put a period right there.
Right,
Every
period.
story. He's like finishing salt. Put a little Godzilla in there. All right, it's gonna taste better.
Yeah, I mean, I've gone pretty deep with like thinking about this stuff and thinking about Godzilla, and um, but yeah, like it really is, and so we're sort of seeing like the limits you can push that notion. But yeah, like Godzilla, I do think that it's like, they talk about like the reptile brain and stuff, that like we have this sort of reptile brain that everything else, every other part of our brain is kind of built on top of. And I think, maybe it's overly literal, but it really, like, I think Godzilla really does speak to that. Like Godzilla is, uh, like we sort of identify with him on a certain level, but then we're also scared of him and can sort of view Godzilla as this like, thing that needs to be destroyed or stopped. But then, you know, I think watching a Godzilla movie, you do also enjoy the mayhem, and he's just the look on Godzilla's face is just like you just don't know what to make of him, because he's kind of like he looks like he's maybe having a good time, but you're not quite sure. Like there's kind of like a smile, but you can't quite. He's just like I mean, I'm a fan of King Kong also, but Godzilla has a mystique. Like Godzilla, like King Kong is maybe a little too familiar, a little too like comforting, and maybe even like a little too complimentary, to us. Where Godzilla's like our dark side.
I think first of all, love that response. And it got me thinking about a response, something you said in another interview about this, but you said that Godzilla has a sardonic face. And I think that word is so perfect for him, because I was looking for that word when I was trying to describe why I liked the Godzilla in -1. A lot of people. I think the very few critiques I had even heard or seen about that movie is that Godzilla seemed a little stiff, but I actually really enjoyed that he was like so. I guess to reuse the word stiff, but that look on his face was like uncaring, and it was like, this is not personal. This is, I am a force of nature that can't be. Like, you cannot understand why I do this, because there is no why. So when I read that, how you describe them, and you bringing up the lizard brain, it fills me with confidence, man, because it seems like you've got a great grasp on why we love Godzilla. And I guess to throw you maybe for a loop, and just to throw in a kind of like a lightning round question. I'm sure you've probably been asked this a few times, but do you have a favorite Godzilla movie?
Yeah, I mean, I loved Godzilla -1. Like I thought it was great. I thought it was great in color. I thought it was great in black and white. I loved Shin Godzilla. Just these sort of like more recent reinventions of Godzilla. I love the original Gojira, like that original one. But the movie I keep coming back to is like the first Godzilla movie I really fell in love with, which was Godzilla versus Megalon.
Hmm.
And it just sort of has it all. Like that, you have Godzilla, which would be cool enough, but then you have Jet Jaguar. You have this. It's like
Yeah.
this like robot that Godzilla can fight and then join up with, and then you have two really cool, like secondary, like two villains for like the two of them to go after. Megalon, and then I'm blanking on the name of the other. The other one was like from like the previous movie, but just these really cool looking sort of half reptile, half like cybernetic kind of monsters. But yeah, it's a one of sort of the goofier Godzilla movies, and one of the ones that people sort of make fun of. But I love that stuff too. Like I want to see Godzilla do his thing, and whatever the setting. And so that one just like maybe from a sentimental place, but I think there's real virtue to that one also. Godzilla versus Megalon.
Tom, I know we got Greg on the call monitoring this for any spoilers, but go ahead and blink if I'm going to see Jet Jaguar in any of these Monsterpiece Theater comics. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I guess, is it safe to say, though, that will we see any of the other monsters in Godzilla in Monsterpiece Theater? Are we going to have any special cameos?
There are going to be monsters other than
Let's do
Godzilla.
it. Let's do it. All right. And then I want to get back to Tony's question, his second question to you. is did you alter your art process in terms of Godzilla Monsterpiece Theater at all in approaching this project? If so, how?
I mean, my art process evolved, and it is like a little different from the approach that I used like for the previous Godzilla, sort of unofficial project that I worked on. Um, it really just it kind of just it's where like my styles just kind of evolved from having done the Stan Lee book and then a bunch of sort of like digital comics and stuff on Instagram and on my Patreon. Um, I'm trying to think how it might like what special changes I might have made for this. I tried to find uh, opportunities to make Godzilla as big as possible, so that kind of changes your panel strategy a little bit, and um, and a lot of cropping. Like cropping is real important with Godzilla because to really show how big Godzilla is, sometimes you have to just like, hey, I can't even fit Godzilla into this panel. There was, I didn't end up going with this, but there was an early draft of the script where you didn't even see Godzilla till like the last couple pages of the first issue. Like I really like this idea of like withholding Godzilla and you just see Godzilla's effect, and and that like that was a fun experiment, a fun thought experiment. But I think people buying a Godzilla comic want to see Godzilla, so I made sure to put more than enough Godzilla in it.
That's a safe assumption. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to look through like pages I might have like screenshot or kept, but I'm having a hard time like pulling them up very quickly. But just off memory, I think one of my favorite sequences in the first issue is watching Godzilla absolutely wreck Great Gatsby's party. Because we had a chance to see that party like visualized in a few different mediums, but I'm also thinking about like the last movie, the Leonardo DiCaprio movie. So I'm watching, I'm reading the book, but I'm also thinking about that movie and how much cooler it would have been if Godzilla would have just showed up in that movie and just devastated an entire party. Imagine Leonardo DiCaprio like swearing revenge on Godzilla amongst like all this ruin.
Yeah, proving my point that Godzilla makes any story better.
Oh my god, that's great. Yeah, it's a theory that keeps proving itself. Now, I guess one thing I wanted to highlight here is that this story is written by you, it's drawn by you, it's colored by you. Is it safe to say also lettered? Is it lettered by you?
Yeah,
as well?
lettered. Yeah, hand lettered by me.
Okay, even better, because I was gonna say it makes you part of an exclusive like comic club, part of an exclusive club in comics, and that is the auteur club in comic books. The people that do it all. And some of the names that like come to mind when I think of auteurs in comics, I mean, your Frank Miller, your Chris Wares, your R. Crumbs, your Walt Simonson, your Mike Mignolas, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm wondering for you, who are like if you had to make a Mount Rushmore of your all-time favorite comic auteurs, like who comes to mind when you're thinking of like these are the people I achieve to be, or these are the people I look to that have inspired me, that are impactful to me, that are my personal favorites? Like what are some of the names that come to mind?
Yeah, I mean Frank Miller is definitely like at the top. Like we don't think of Jack Kirby as an auteur, but I guess if you look at those pages before they were inked, they are readable and very beautiful as comics, and they have his hand lettering on the page. So I think we could lump Kirby into that category, even though the final printed books. I mean, maybe there's a comic out there somewhere that he did, like lettering, coloring, and everything. But I'd include him too, obviously. But yeah, Frank Miller is a big one. I think Frank Miller like sometimes would letter his stuff, but not always. And of course, sometimes just like no color or spot color, or have somebody else color them. But yeah, Miller's a big influence, and I think you'll see some of his influence in this comic in particular. I have a lot of like long, thin or wide, thin panels that are definitely something that definitely a lesson I picked up from Frank's work. Like like his stuff really sings, when he does he does those.
So you've got Frank Miller, Jack Kirby. Can you give me two more to
Yeah,
round out that Mount
yeah. Let me
Rushmore?
think. Yeah, Frank Miller, Jack Kirby. Um, just trying to think about like who I've been looking at lately. I mean, uh, Michael Golden, Walt Simonson, um, uh, Mike Mignola. Just like, yeah, just people who are like just really strong visualists.
That's a
Gil,
solid
yeah,
Mount Rushmore. It's like a
yeah. Gil Kane, Wally Wood. I mean, I'm a fan of so many creators, and of course, I mean Alan Moore. Even though he's not really known as an artist, I've heard that he draws his comic like when he's writing a script, he actually draws a version, like a thumbnail of the comic, and then he types a description of what he drew and then never shows the artist what he drew. He just describes it in time because he doesn't want to
wow.
sort of prejudice them.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's my understanding of how he
I
works.
did not know. I guess on you just shared a great tidbit. I'm curious to know what is the most, as someone who has created, I think I said in the intro, like what I feel like is one of the quintessential Jack Kirby, things out there. In addition to, there's what is Mark Evaniers' Jack Kirby book? I think it's called like King Kirby, I believe. Um, as someone who has, been vocal about his appreciation and admiration of Jack Kirby. I mean, your style is constantly compared to it. I don't think you make it any secret that you draw influence from that. And then, obviously the graphic novel Jack Kirby book that you put out. What's the most interesting thing about Jack Kirby that you've learned? Like, do you have like I don't know, a tidbit that you don't think enough people know about Jack Kirby?
Yeah, I mean, his war service was sort of a big revelation. I think, and hopefully for people reading the book who didn't know a ton about Jack Kirby, his war service, just because you hear about that his generation, and it's like a lot of. I mean, even Stan Lee was in the army in World War II. You hear about, oh, this guy was in the army, this guy was in the army, but when you hear Jack's stories and what he did, he was like Sergeant Fury and the Howling Commandos or something. Like he was in the thick of it. He was in some harrowing situations, and like so that's super interesting. But that seems fairly widely known. I guess like a little like factoid or whatever that I learned just in the course of making the book was I kind of wondered like, oh, what's Jack Kirby's first superhero? What's the first superhero he worked on? Not necessarily invented, but the first superhero he worked on. And it's like, okay, yeah, there's the Black Owl, and there's Blue Bolt, and there's these characters. But do you know the first superhero that he worked on?
If I did, it was like years ago when I first found that Mark Evanier Kirby book. I felt like I was a Kirby encyclopedia then, but his life is just so encompassing. There's a lot of details you could easily forget. So the answer is no, I do not know who the
Okay,
first
yeah,
superhero.
it was Blue Beetle, which kind of surprised me because Blue Beetle, if I think of like an artist associated with Blue Beetle, I think of Steve Ditko,
Yeah.
who sort of revamped Blue Beetle in the '50s. Like you don't think Jack Kirby and I knew he had done Blue Beetle comics, but when I was like putting together the chronology, it's like that was the very first. That was the first superhero he worked on. Like somebody else invented it. He was just sort of filling in as a ghost, like didn't even sign his name to it. But yeah, the first superhero that this guy who's known as like, one of the creators of the superhero genre was Blue Beetle. So there's a little
Dang.
something to chew on.
And I appreciate that. I will say in that same vein, one of my favorite pages from the Epic Life of the King of Jack Kirby, the Epic Life of the King of Comics, is you were able to dilute this portion in his early life where he was, going under different pseudonames and pen names. And so like one efficient and effective page where you kind of explain like, hey, here's all the different names he took. Here's why. And then you kept it moving. And I just thought like, and I guess that just made me appreciate that book. And that's a big reason why I'm appreciating that book so far. I haven't finished it yet, but I'm making some good progress. Is your ability to like take someone's life like Jack Kirby, which is not the easiest, like, it's not a straight through line, right? Like, there's a lot of sub branches to it and a lot of intricacies. And the way you're able to, like, pick and choose and compress certain points of his life. I mean, it's, to me, like I said, it's like quintessential read for, I think, comic fans, period, but also like anyone that remotely likes Jack Kirby.
Yeah, Jack had this like life and this career where you could have stopped that story at any point and it would be like,
Yes,
okay, that's
yes.
it. Like, wow, what a
Perfect.
what a body of work. And if he had just sort of, when the comics industry sort of, collapsed in the 50s, like if he had just sort of called it a day, like a lot of people did, and moved on to something else, that's a pretty amazing body of work. Even that early body of work you were talking about with all the pseudonyms, there's so much there. Like there is like reams of this stuff. But yeah, he just kept going and going, almost up to the end of the 20th century, and just would have these like reinventions. He would just you just think about what he was doing in the 60s, and it's like, okay, we've seen it all. That's it for Jack Kirby. And then the 70s, and the New Gods and all that stuff. And then even like when he moves over to animation, we've only seen a fraction of that work too, because he did all these amazing like presentation pieces and storyboards and things, and just and some of it made it to the air, a lot of it didn't. So I mean, he just kept going and going, and then even sort of had like an Image Comics career at the very end.
Well said. Yeah, I think it's a sign of a true artist that has not only longevity, but like the ability to transform with the times and reinvent themselves. Whether it's as whatever, as good as their prime or whatever. I think is subjective, but I think you can appreciate, like, Jack Kirby never stopped, and his love of the art form, and wanting to push it and reinvent himself is just incredible. And I guess I wanted to turn the tables on you and ask, like, I guess that's, you had mentioned like 99 was when you got that grant. And now, fast forward here, we're looking at almost a 25-year career. I guess, like, what keeps you going in comics? It's no secret. It's not the easiest, field or career to have. So why comic books? Like, what is it about the art form and the medium that keeps you going, that makes you want to continue to put out like new bodies of work every year? And so,
I mean, I enjoy the puzzle of it. I enjoy trying to figure out how to make this thing, how to create something out of nothing, and then make it mean something, and figure it out. And every single time, it's like uh, a unique project. Like it doesn't. There's really like nothing. Like you can't do the same thing twice. Like no matter how many of these I do, when it's the new one, it's like, where do I start? What do I that blank page? And it's just so much fun. There's so much possibility, and it can really be anything, and you just have infinite options. There's a bunch of wrong answers, and then there's also a bunch of right answers. So it just like I just never get bored of it. Even just talking about trying to figure out this like final issue, there are endless options, and you can get lost in that. Like, thank God for deadlines, because it's like you could just like, because I'm coming up with all these like, okay, well, it could be like this, it could be this, and this, and this, or it could be this, it could be so like, yeah, that just that's never gotten boring for me. I don't know that it ever will. Like, it just it's a problem that I can solve, but it's a problem that I'm continually learning, and continually testing out other options. So it's might be impossible to get bored with the comics art form.
damn, I love hearing you say that. That's great. Moving on, I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't mention that Godzilla Monsterpiece Theater #1 has 2 incentive covers, which I can appreciate, like, that number, because sometimes, incentive covers get a little crazy. You're like, wait, how many extra covers is there for this one book? But you have a very tasteful number of variant covers for this. One that is done by Jim Rugg, and another one that is done by Jim Mafood, who are no strangers to your orbit. They're colleagues, they're frequent collaborators. And I also understand that at least one of them, I believe Jim Rugg, I'm not sure about Jim of Food, but Jim Rugg and yourself were headliners for the first ever Eddie P Comic Con that took place in Pittsburgh. I think a couple weeks ago, maybe
Yeah, just a
last
couple
month.
weeks.
And I was, as someone that wanted to go, but just kind of been traveling for work a lot lately. Like, how was that? I know it was the first inaugural one. His family threw it together. I think there was a charity aspect to it. The comics were being sold, and I personally knew some people that were driving, 3-5 hours to attend that, to pay their respect and be among other, kayfabers. Like, how was the event from your perspective?
Yeah, it was great. I don't know if you've talked to those people since then, but there was like an amazing energy in the room.
Wow.
Everybody was like just really happy to be there. Everybody was really happy with, and then even just sort of talking to people who like brought their comics to sell and stuff. I didn't hear any kind of like it was all good stuff. Like, oh yeah, I did great, or oh, I had a great time, or like it was the venue was pretty nice. It was just good people. It was almost kind of um, like a cartoonist kayfabe reunion or something, because it was
That's
a
cool.
lot of like people who I felt like I might have known. Sometimes I'd sort of be
Yeah,
like, oh wait,
yeah.
that person looks familiar. And it would be like or screen names. It's like matching. It's like I think I know that person's screen name, maybe not their real name, and stuff like that. But it
Yeah,
was a really really good day, and the family was super thrilled with
that's awesome.
how everything went and the feedback that they got, and so they have plans for like bigger and better next time. So
Damn, that's
hopefully
beautiful.
you make it out for that one.
No, absolutely, man. I was bummed that I had to miss Heroes Con this year because I wanted to attend the Eddie P Memorial panel that Jim Rugg, and I believe Jim of Food was definitely on that one. And but I got to watch it on YouTube. It was great to hear them talk about Ed and celebrate his life and share their memories. So I was curious if you don't mind sharing, like, what's your favorite memory of Ed Piskor? Like, did you have a chance to add to that? Sorry for the compound question. Like, did you have a chance to tell him about Godzilla Monsterpiece Theater? Like, did he have a chance to see any of the early pages or pitch deck or anything like that?
I mean, he knew about sort of the ongoing Godzilla that, yeah, and I did, I did, yeah, like the last time I talked to him, I did tell him about it, and he was excited about it. Like, I think like we did like an interview on camera and stuff, but then when the cameras were up, like I couldn't speak about the
Sure.
because I said like the elevator pitch, you got to hear, and so then when the cameras were off or whatever, I told him the Godzilla and Gatsby. So yeah, I did get to tell him about that. Um, yeah, and yeah, my favorite memory of it, it's hard. I mean, because a lot of the time, like on those panels and things, they do talk about their favorite memories and stuff. And yeah, it's hard for me to pin down an exact memory. I mean, I know that like Ed was somebody who was just just really helpful to me like throughout my career, and hopefully like it was reversed. Like hopefully like I feel like I was able to help him when he needed it, and at various points. But he was definitely like a huge help, and especially like those talking about like quitting my day job and stuff. He had a lot of good advice and perspective about that. So I remember a lot of laughs. Like I remember sometimes being in like situations with Ed where like you got to keep a straight face, like like on panels or whatever, and then like as soon as it's over and like we're out, just like cracking up, like hysterical laughing of like trying to like keep stuff in. But yeah, it's it's hard for like yeah, it's hard for me to think of like an exact one, but yeah, I mean, and yeah, we had been on some pretty cool panels to get like kind of like pinch me moments where you're like on stage with like your heroes and stuff like that, and we got to sort of share a lot of that trajectory.
I think one year Cartoonist Kayfabe was at Heroes Con, and they were recording a live episode, and it was with Bill Sienkiewicz, and I attended that one. And I mean, just the exuberance, the joy, the glee on both of their faces. It just was a reminder of like, damn, I'm so glad there's like people like you guys in the Cartoonist Kayfabe group that love comics to this extent, and you guys are not afraid to like wear your fanboy on the sleeve. So thanks for sharing that. I really appreciate it. I guess to get in trying to I guess in closing, I want to put one more spotlight back on Godzilla Monsterpiece Theater, which once again, issue one is in shops, in your local comic shops, October 23rd. Final order cutoff is Monday, September 16th. So that means if you want to guarantee that you get issue one, you want to tell your local comic shop to order you the book by September 16th. It also goes a long way, by the way, in ensuring that one, it helps you because you get your comic book. Two, it helps your local comic shop because then it takes less of the guesswork out of what they need to order. And three, it also lets publishers like IDW know I want more bombastic, wild, cool, fresh ideas like this in my comic books. So, Tom, I toss this to you, and I want to know what did you have any last words, parting words, or something that people should know about Godzilla Monsterpiece Theater that we haven't discussed? Like, why should people go in their local comic shops and pick that up and give it a shot?
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is like exactly the kind of comic that people talk about, like say like, man, if only comics were more like this, if only comics were more fun, more freewheeling, if there was like an emphasis on like action, adventure, excitement, so everybody's talking the talk of like, this is the kind of comic they want. So now's your chance. This is like,
Nice.
comics like they used to make and like they never made, just sort of, trying. I really like, again, that the problem of like trying to figure out what your comic is. It's like I'm chasing this idea of like what I want to see as a comic, and this is exactly the kind of comic I want to read. I want more comics like this. If somebody out there is making comics that are like this, let me know, because this is what I'm into, and hopefully, you're into it too.
I think anyone that reads for the first issue will be able to confidently say, I'm into this for sure. I don't know what this is, might be, but I'm into it. No, Tom, seriously, the first issue was awesome. I'm going to make sure I pre-order the entire series. I also have a feeling that, I mean, this might be getting way too ahead, but I just have a feeling that whatever collected edition comes out of this is probably going to be pretty awesome, because yourself, when I think of Jim and the way you guys put your thought and care into not only the single issues, but the collected editions too. Like, I'm here for all of this Godzilla versus my entire high school reading catalog. So best of luck with the first issue. And I want to let the Shortbox Nation know, hey, we just finished talking with Tom Scioli about his newest forthcoming comic, Godzilla Monsterpiece Theater, which will be available at all comic shops. Once again, issue one on October 20th. If you want to ensure that you don't miss out on issue one, make sure to get your final order cutoff, or make sure to order the comic book at your local comic shop by September 16th. Monday, September 16th is the final order cutoff. I already gave you all the reasons why that's helpful. Go pick up issue one, order it if you can. I mean, buckle up, because it is one hell of a joyride, and it's going to be worth every single penny that they're asking for on this. Tom, you're fantastic. Do you have any parting words, any upcoming projects, any other plugs and things that you want to mention before we sign off?
Yeah, I mean, Badr, thanks for having me on the show. And I do a YouTube show too called the Total Recall Show. And every Friday I review a different issue of the Fantastic Four on Fantastic Four Friday. So those are some things to be on the lookout for. And follow me on Twitter at Tom Scioli, on Instagram at Tom_Scioli. And I also have a Patreon if you want to, go on Patreon and search my name. And a lot of these, pandemic projects and, comics that I've done that maybe never saw print are you can find them there.
I definitely am curious about this Godzilla graphic novel, test a comic book that you whipped together to get this. I'll be checking that out. I'll have links to your links. I'll have links to your socials in these show notes, and the YouTube channel. Real quick, first of all, I love Fantastic Four Day or Friday, however you said that, was way better than I just did. What issue are you on now? You said you're covering one issue of Fantastic Four from issue one up.
Just did issue 10. So going through that giant Toshin collection where it's this gigantic thing,
the jumbo
slab.
size books.
and the books they really sing in that format. Like short of getting the original issues, it's just seeing the artwork at that size and with the full color and with the ads and with sometimes there's like a weird like pin up or some page where Mr. Fantastic's talking about how his powers work, like all this like this oddball stuff. It's just an amazing read. Like I'm seeing the comic with new eyes. Like I wish I would have had this when I did Fantastic Four Grand Design. I mean, I don't know if I would have done anything different, but the research process would have been a lot more pleasurable. It's just a really nice form.
Imagine my local comic shop, Gotham City Limit, had the Spider-Man one. I think that was the first time I had ever seen these Toshin jumbo size books. And I swear to you, Ben, the owner, had a back brace while he was like moving these books off of out of the packaging. Those books are huge, but you're right. It is something about seeing like, these standard, 8.5 by 10 or 11 books blown up to damn near poster size, like the amount of details and something about like the simplicity of those like older comic books with like the very simple colored backgrounds. I don't know. It's just something like, to your point, you do see it in a new light. So I might have to go and shell out for this Fantastic Four one, but I'll definitely give the YouTube a subscribe. And I hope to anyone listening out there, once again, Godzilla Monsterpiece Theater issue 1, October 23rd. I have links to Tom's socials in the show notes. So do yourself a favor and do your timeline a favor. All right. Tom posts some really amazing artwork as well as cool comics and some of his finds among his travels. So we could all use a little bit of that in our timeline. So give him a follow. And Tom, once again, thanks again for hopping on the short box. You are more than welcome back any other time. I'd love to pick your brain some more about comics. All right.
Sounds great, Potter. We could talk about issue 2.
There we go. Hell yeah. And we are, all right, we are good here. I'm going to stop this.